Hello and welcome to part 2 of how to build a Space Marine, one of the new ones out of the new box sets, requested again obviously by Luke Morrison. I will say that every time now. So what I normally do is I don't really use a cutting board as a cutting board, I just use it as a place to store my stuff because it's, well, things do slide around on it, but normally I'll hold a miniature and cut it, try and cut it away from me, but sometimes you have to cut it towards you. But I suppose it's a very dangerous way of doing things, but you only live once, right? And what's the worst that can happen? So that's, and I just do an initial cleanup, a very initial cleanup. Try not to take too much of the plastic off. Again, I'm trying to be efficient rather than quick. And this is just an initial cleanup. Don't worry if you take too much plastic off. It's not going to affect it too much because you can always file it down later on. Now, what I'm doing when I'm doing this is I'm also two things at once really. One is I'm cleaning up the model, and two, I'm looking at the model where there are mould lines and things. If there aren't any mould lines whatsoever and they're quite clean, I might glue a few pieces at this stage. So I want to glue this chest piece because there's not really many mould lines, and I always glue in the little divots of any model rather than, you know, the contact. I suppose you should really glue the contact, but sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. It's just a small issue, and that is lined up okay. So that's going to be drying, and then I'll carry on. Might leave the top off the glue, doesn't really matter too much. This grav gun has a few mould lines in places. And we'll just do the rest for all of them. Just be very careful if you are kind of like doing it the way I'm doing it, because you can slip. So it's a very unsafe way of doing things, but honestly I can't see myself, like, you know, just cutting bits off on there. I just can't. I don't know why. I've just got into this, you know, habit of doing it this way. And yeah, you know, parts do, you know, fly out my fingers and fall, but I've never ever completely lost a piece. Now this bit, because I've left quite a lot of you know, excess, now this bit I will actually, you know, use the cutting board, because the amount of force required, even with a brand new blade on a modelling knife, it might require too much force to strip that plastic off. This one is not too bad, but again, you're trying to just take off the excess without taking too much plastic off, because you don't want to have to green stuff things later on. So just trying to take off a little bit here and there, and I've probably got more steps than people would kind of require. But this is just the way I do it. As I say, there's no real right or wrong way of doing things like this. It's what you wanna. It's the way you wanna do this. Now after that, I quickly reach for my file. Sometimes it depends. If it's a large model like a tank or something, I'll use this, which is kind of like a mould line extractor or remover. So what you do is you just scrape. See how that has scraped some of the mould line off. But I find a lot of the time it's difficult to do that in the little nuts and crannies, and sometimes it's difficult to see if you've actually taken that mould line off. But it's working all right, and even with this mould line remover you can still take off too much plastic than you may need to, and it makes it look quite flat sometimes where you've done that. So what I sometimes revert to is this triangular file. I think you can still get the files from them, I'm not quite completely sure on that, and then I just file along the edge. And don't worry about the scratches and things on the plastic. when it comes to spraying and painting, they don't really show up, and I'd much rather have, you know, a couple of scratches and things, or potential scratches, than having just like a line looks like the soldiers come out of a mould. Don't worry about all the excess plastic. I would say, you know, don't breathe it in, but it's not that bad really. It's not as bad as epoxy resin by any means. That stuff is you do not want the epoxy resin in your lungs, but this stuff is not, it's not too bad. And don't worry about all the little dust particles of the plastic, or excess particles of the plastic, because later on, what I do when it's all glued and it's dried, it's very important that it has to be dried, so you might want to wait a few hours or even a day. I normally wait a day for all these things to glue, so I do other things in the meantime, and then when it comes to spraying, I'll just brush the models and get all of that dust and things off. You want to do that anyway before you spray, because you don't want the dust and excess plastic to attach to the model before it's painted or sprayed. So don't worry too much about the dust and things, that's fine. I've got my Centurions over here, they still have some dust and things. I glued them yesterday. I can spray them whenever, but before I do, I'd use the brush, because I have sprayed a lot of models before where I haven't, and that has obviously affected the finished product. So once I've finished, and now it's a pretty much the stage now is each piece I'll file or do the mould lines, and I will then glue straight away. It depends. Sometimes I'll feel like filing all of them and then go back and gluing them, because gluing them is just the funnest part in my opinion. I mean, yeah, playing with them is good, but gaming with them is good, but gluing them is really the fun part for me anyway. So as you can see, I do put a bit too much glue on. I do get a bit excited, but it's difficult to judge it. But I don't put an awful lot on. What we do is he's glued. He's ready to be, you know, he's not ready, but he's going to be drying while I'm doing all the mould lines and things for all the other parts. So what I'd like to do is just do some of the flash and the mould lines of these, or the excess bits that I chopped off earlier, just tidy them up. So as you can see, you probably all do this anyway, or if you're new to the hobby, I have a kind of a drying area, a to-do area, and kind of like a work, you know, a finished area. So this is like a finished area over here, so all the things I've filed and things go over there ready to be glued. So it's kind of like a three-stage process in a way, and if you do that, you'll know where you are really. I mean, it sounds like common sense, doesn't it? But I mean, some people will want to do everything at once, so they'll want to, you know, clean up all their pieces first and have them all there in the finished pile. Some people will do it this way. It's really is personal preference. There's no right or wrong way, and we're all a community, so we can all bounce off ideas of how we do things like that. Now this grav gun has got a fair few mould lines and things, so. But as I say, this mould line business is just personal preference really. It's not a requirement. This is just something I've got into the habit of doing, and I don't mind doing this in this procedure. Backpacks are normally quite difficult to get the mould lines off, because they have a mould line in between those vents. So and they have mould lines in these little areas. So what I do, many people won't see those areas anyway, but what I do is I just get the hobby knife and just chip away a little bit there. Now with round areas, you are kind of supposed to use the round file, the circular file, cylindrical file, whatever you want to call it. But the flat one isn't too bad. So sorry about that, I was disturbed, and I will continue. So what I do is I just will file and clean up these arms. On the top of the arms, it's not really a requirement to get rid of the mould lines, because you're going to have the shoulder pads kind of covering them anyway. So, and that's what you kind of got to do. You know, when you're cleaning up these parts, in your mind, you've got to think of where things will be seen, where things won't be seen. Everybody does that, especially people that make vehicles and things, because they want to know where to spray the paint, which parts they should glue after they've sprayed and painted, like the interiors. A lot of people paint a lot of their interiors, so people do that all the time with those models. But you just want to have a couple of strokes with the file. You don't want to be too aggressive. It's literally a couple of strokes just to snap that mould line off. Now what I would do is I would do the torso, but this bit is kind of like one of the trickiest bits of building a Space Marine. So I'd glue the underside, and really would try and get him in a decent pose here, trying to kind of think of where the arms are going to go. What you can do is you can kind of like experiment a little bit. Now I want him kind of side on, so that kind of works for me at the moment. Now with the weapon, what I normally do is this is probably the hardest, trickiest bit of the whole model, in my opinion. It always has, and I think it always will be, because you've got a semi-dry torso here, and you're trying to kind of put arms in places that aren't glued, and it can be very tricky. Alright, so I think that would work there, but I don't know how far the gun can go. I mean, they've measured them out when they're building them to accommodate. It's supposed to be about roughly the same size as a bolt gun, but this, as you can see, I mean, I've got quite steady hands, but even for me it's quite tricky to get it all, you know, lined up and ready. Now I think that arm is a bit too long, so we'll go for this one. How about this one? Is this one better? That one's probably a bit better. So we're going to use that one. Now this is, like I say, this is the trickiest bit, so you've got to be quick. I glue both sides. I glue his palm, and I think I used the other one, but we'll just use this one. That should be fine. So I glue there, glue his wrist, glue the other arm, and that's almost ready. Now I pop the weapon in, the moment of truth, and that kind of fits in, and now it's just a clean up operation of trying to get everything kind of ready. And lined up. As you can see, it's a very delicate, important part of the whole process, this part, and this will set it up. So his gun is aimed slightly higher, which is fine. It's an okay pose. Now, don't worry about the fact that the gun hasn't got a hole in the end. Don't worry about it. I know that it should have a hole in the end, and once it's all dry, believe me, you can put a little bit of force with the drill and drill a hole in. I've just done this, you know, I should have really drilled the hole in before while it wasn't glued, but mistakes like that will happen, but you can later on reverse those mistakes and make them work for you. So that's an okay pose. His gun is a little bit too far away from his body, in my opinion, where his left hand is holding it, but he's a Space Marine, I'm sure he can cope. So I didn't glue those other two parts, so they can be put on another Space Marine. Now the fun bit I really like, not just this bit obviously, but I'll glue the backpack, just put a little bit on in the hole and on the edge. Not sure how far we're getting in with the minutes here, but glue the backpack, glue the head, glue the shoulders. Now it's up to you whether you want to glue inside the shoulder. Sometimes I glue inside, sometimes I glue directly on the shoulders. Put the shoulder pauldrons on. Like so. And the head in a nice position. There we go, so he's kind of like looking down the sights. Well, not really looking down the sights, but he's looking along the gun length where he's going to fire. So he's in a decent place. And then finally you can put purity seal on somewhere. A little bit of clean up operation on that one I didn't do earlier. And you can put that, I'm going to put it there, right in the corner of his pauldron. Very minute amount of glue for this part. And I think that kind of works. And there you go. So a complete Space Marine, obviously without a hole in the gun, but that is my step-by-step process of how to glue one. I should really put the grenades on at some point, but in doing so I might upset the gun and things because it's still drying, so I might do that later. But all in all, that's my step-by-step. If you do want to see me do a step-by-step with any other model, obviously the larger the model, like a Titan or something like that, is gonna be a lot longer video, but I can do all those things. So if you have enjoyed this video, if you have found it useful, if you've just started getting into Warhammer or the hobby in general, please do comment, rate and subscribe. Just put a comment in if you do anything different. Share it with the community. I hope you found this useful anyway. You know, thank you very much for watching today. The Emperor protects.